So welcome everybody to today's Career Development Center webinar on interview preparation. We'll be discussing the topic Ace the Interview. We're joined today by career counselor Estella Saldana, who is also quite the guru in interview preparation, and she'll be managing our chat box. So throughout our conversation today, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. And we'll also open up for Q&A at the end if you have any questions that you'd like to share at that time as well. So today, talking about Ace the Interview as follow-up to previous webinars we've held through the Career Development Center on resume writing, cover letter writing, and other elements of preparation for your job search activities. So this webinar builds upon previous sessions. And if you haven't had a chance to catch those sessions, we encourage you to check out our website, which is noted here on the screen, where you can access all of our resources and access links to previous webinar recordings, as well as future scheduled live sessions. So before we launch into our topic in full, I just want to share a quick overview of our Career Development Center, as we're really here to equip you for many elements of your career journey, including interview preparation, but really the full scope of equipping you to discover your calling and empower you to apply your strengths, knowledge, skills, and abilities to pursue a life of purpose in alignment with God's will. So it's our deep desire at Fresno Pacific University that you're able to utilize your education in a meaningful way, whether that's through work, volunteer work, ministry, or other forms of vocation that you may feel called to in your life. So we encourage you to reach out to us and access a myriad of resources and support, all of which is free for all Fresno Pacific University students and alumni. So that we can help encourage you and equip you along that journey so you can make big strides forward toward whatever goals you've set for yourself in your life. So for today's topic on interview preparation, we'll be reviewing these key areas, and we'll walk through each one individually, really building from the baseline of interview preparation, which is research, and then progressing all the way through to the close of the interview, which is leading you towards next steps in your screening process. So we'll break down each of these 7 items, from researching the company to comparing your skills to the job description, preparing your responses, planning what to wear and what to bring, being attentive to not only your verbal communication, but also your nonverbal communication, and then, of course, the very important close and follow-up. So from the start, as with many things in career development, much of our work begins with research, and this is ever so true with interview preparation. Research will help you to understand not only the job that you're applying for, but also to gain a better understanding of the organization, the team, and how you might fit in best within that framework, so that ultimately within the interview, you'll be pitching yourself not only as a great fit for the job, but also for the organization. So this will help you to answer questions and stand out from potentially less prepared candidates. We currently live in a fairly competitive job market, and looking back over time, I think probably any job market is competitive, just sometimes in different ways. And so being very prepared with research is essential. Where do you go for research? There's lots of different places. Of course, the organization's website is a great go-to, as you can learn about their mission, vision, and values, see what kind of projects and initiatives that they're involved in beyond the scope of the job that you're applying for your contribution to that organization. You can assess their products, their services, as well as their client base, and see how they target and relate to their target population of clientele for whatever product or service they may be offering. You can also read recent press releases and gain insight on projected growth and stability. So one of the great reasons to utilize a company's website in full and really research it thoroughly is that you gain a great lens into how the company views itself. Everything that's within an organizational website is carefully selected to speak to a very critical part of their mission or how they want their client base to perceive them. So by looking at the organization's website, you're gaining insight into their lens and how they want to be viewed and interacted with among the economy at large. You can also look to external sources to gain a better understanding of how the organization is viewed by others. And some of those resources include Vault and an organization called the Muse. Those are listed here on our screen. Those can help you to gain great perspective, and you can read customer reviews as well as former employee reviews to understand how others have experienced their interaction, their service offerings, and other forms of business transactions with that organization. Two other excellent resources include LinkedIn and Glassdoor, which are primarily employee focused, where you can read more reviews from employees who have worked within the organization, as well as gain a better understanding of the organizational network as a whole. For example, with LinkedIn, you can easily see if you have any connections within that organization, if there are folks within your professional network that are already working with or have formerly worked with that particular company. If you do have connections, if you're planning well ahead of time, it may give you an opportunity to reach out to those folks and ask for a conversation and gain even more perspective from an individual that you know, potentially trust and have some experience with already, and learning about how they went about working for the organization, what their experience was, what they might recommend to somebody else who's also pursuing work in the same company. Another great source for insight is trade and business publications. This can give you greater perspective into the industry standing. And so every company has a competitor pool within their market, and trade and business publications can help you to understand where they fit in. Are they a leader in the industry? Are they kind of up and coming or a good mid-sized player? How do other competitors across their market perceive them, and how do they interact with and accommodate, market stability and market transactions across the industry as a whole? So that will give you some much broader perspective in the organizational structure as a whole. As you're doing all this research, it's very important to develop a question list. All this research will give you some very great information that you can leverage as a tool later in your interview. So you'll probably have questions that come to mind or thoughts that stand out to you as you're going through all the research. You'll want to jot those down and start creating a list of notes that you can draw from during your interview interaction. We'll get back to those questions a little bit later in our webinar today, but jotting down those questions during research is an important step. All right, next step in your preparation is comparing your skills with the job description. This is where you're doing further research on yourself and your fit for the role. If you've applied for the role and you've been asked to interview, you can logically assume that the organization already sees you as potentially a great fit for the job. So your preparation for the interview is to take another step and really help to showcase how your skill set is well aligned with the requirements of the job, as well as with other things that could come up in the course of business and doing your work there if you were given the job offer. A good tactic for this kind of preparation is to use your own resume as a reference to develop talking points for your interview. You've likely tailored your resume. That's what we always suggest within the Career Center. So for your application, you likely tailored your resume to speak to the demands of that job when you applied. So you already have a strong base. And as you're looking through your resume, you can start to jot down notes of examples or stories that you can tell to elaborate on what you noted in your resume and really illustrate how you applied your skill set and made an impact within the work that you did in your education, your experience, your volunteer work, and anything that may be listed on your resume. You'll want to be taking careful note of the job description as you're doing this so that you're being sure to develop that narrative and the stories that you're tell in relevance to the skill set that the employer is seeking. So they tell you right there in the job description what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities required for the job. And you can be armed and ready to share lots of stories and illustrations on exactly how you can fulfill those demands. Another piece that you can learn or research and prepare for within this step is where the position fits within the organization. Think about whether this is an entry-level job, if it's low-level or mid-level management, if it's an executive role, and then within the role itself, what kinds of team players would you be working with as peers or as folks who are reporting to you or other individuals that you may report to as your superiors. You can also be thinking through what other departments or teams across the organization might this role partner with. And in that way, you can develop a list of potential questions, which again we'll address later on in this webinar. But you can develop a sense of where you fit in if you were to take on this role, and then be able to speak to the employer through the interview in regard to your ability to communicate and collaborate with others across their employer network, whether they're same level, lower level, higher level, or other departments. So you'll want to be prepared to not only showcase how you can do the job well, but how you can make a big impact on the organization and how your role fits in across the organization. So as you're preparing your responses, here are some sample questions and answers. These are typically pretty common questions that pop up in most interviews. And so this can give you a good start in regard to thinking about how you would illustrate your skill set. The first question noted, tell me about yourself, is really common to just about every interview. It's really a great opportunity to share a strong opening and emphasize the strengths that you want the employer to pay most attention to when they're thinking about you as a great candidate for that job. If you've ever developed an elevator pitch, speaking your elevator pitch in response to the question, can you tell me about yourself, is typically a really great way to go about responding to that kind of question. We'll have some resources to follow up to this webinar on how to develop an elevator pitch. So if you've never done that in the past, no worries, we'll equip you for that. And if you have done it in the past, now you can start thinking about how to gear your elevator pitch towards interview questions of this nature. So when you're asked why you're interested in the job, which is the second question noted, a great approach that you can not only answer the question, but you can ask a question as well. A good way to approach an interview overall is to stop thinking about the job interview as a series of questions for you, and instead turn the interview into a conversation. In that way, you're achieving a level of exchange with the employer as you're going through the interview, which helps to build rapport. It leaves a stronger first impression to the interaction, and it allows the employer to also feel very engaged. So they stop getting into kind of a monotonous framework of asking a question and then being quiet and listening. But they're interacting with you and therefore engaged in your responses, which naturally makes a human more curious and apt to pay really close attention to everything that you're saying. A great tip that we always like to give is to end your responses with a question yourself when it's appropriate. So in doing so, you can then show that you're applying not only your knowledge, skills, and abilities to the job, but you're thinking again about that fit within the organization as a whole. Some of these other questions we have sample answers to within our website resources. So at the end of this webinar, we'll share a resource slide and you'll be able to access some sample responses to questions like those that are noted here on the screen. Another great way to prepare yourself for interviews is to think about the stories you tell within the STAR framework. STAR stories help you to stand out like a star because they're very thorough. They help you to guide a response from a logical start, middle, finish as you're sharing important detail about your strengths, skills, abilities, etc. So many questions that an employer will ask you have a bit of an open-ended component to them. They're not yes or no or cut and dry responses. And this is where the STAR stories can really come in handy. They provide context and background. So when you first describe a situation you're dealing with, you're framing that by sharing what the scenario was, who were the people that were involved, what kind of setting was it involved in, what kind of overarching issue were you trying to address with that particular scenario. That's the S, the situation. Then we move to T, the task, which is where you describe the expectations, what needed to be done and why. This would be specifying the problem within that scenario, stating what had to be accomplished, perhaps including details like the time frame or the goals that were needing to be met, and giving some scope to the task at hand, which then moves you to the action. What did you do to address that task at hand? How did you do it? What tools did you use? This is a great place where you can elaborate on your strengths, your hard skills, if you had utilized technology or project or people or program processes. You can insert all of that detail here in describing your action, which then of course guides you to your result. What was the outcome? And it's important to always be careful to prepare yourself with STAR stories that have a positive outcome. So of course, you're illustrating your impact in promoting the good of the organization and the benefit of what you did within your job. So all that research ahead of time can help you to find those STAR stories where you had a positive outcome that you can then share with the employer. So going through the sequence of the STAR story framework gives you confidence in the moment so that when you get to the interview, if you're like me, I mean, even though I've interviewed many, many times, I still get very nervous and sometimes my brain is apt to just go completely blank at the worst moment. And having STAR stories prepared is always a great aid because you can look at your notes, remember some of your illustrations, and then go into your story. You've already practiced it and it's well versed. And so even if you're kind of getting through some of that nervousness in the moment, this will help you to feel confident and fluid in your response and at that moment. So we recommend this. We have more resources on how to craft STAR stories on our website. And so we'll point you to those here as well. All right, as you're preparing responses, sometimes it's great to take a look at examples and what other folks have done. So since it launches right into it, I'll pause for a moment now. We'll watch a sample answer to an interview question.
Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult coworker.
Sure. I was working as a psychology associate at a correctional facility where I provided case management services and daily therapeutic intervention and assessment for adult male inmates who all had severe persistent mental health issues. I was getting ready to leave my job because I was moving out of state and I had to train someone to take over on my caseload. The coworker who I was training to take over my caseload was also new to the organization, so she didn't know all the ins and outs of her position. I emailed her to set up several meetings over the course of a few weeks to bring her up to speed. Our first few interactions I thought were somewhat negative. She was very short in her responses to me when I would ask her questions or provide her information, and I thought her speech was very harsh in tone. I originally sort of brushed it off and thought maybe she was just having a bad day, and I didn't think too much about it. But as we continued to meet, I thought the interactions became more negative, and I started to feel uncomfortable. I would say hello to her, ask her how she was. She would just ignore me and was really rude. At this point, I thought this isn't going well, and I was really worried that she wasn't going to be trained well enough for when I left. I thought about it for a few days, and I knew I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure that going to my supervisor was really the best course of action because I didn't want to blow the situation out of proportion, and I certainly did not want to get her in trouble. I decided I would speak to her privately about it and let her know how I was feeling and try to understand what she was thinking and feeling. I let her know that I thought our meetings were unproductive at this time, and I was really worried that she was not going to have all the information and be ready to take over my caseload. I also asked her if there was something that I did that made her feel uncomfortable or upset her, and to let me know if there was something I could do better. She told me that, it wasn't me. She apologized. She said she was really stressed out because of some personal issues she was having, and that she was feeling very overwhelmed with learning the new job and everything that went along with working at the prison. So I think that this talk was really great because I was able to clear up the communication issues and the conflict that I was feeling. And we were both able to let each other know what we were thinking and what we needed. And because she was feeling overwhelmed with some of the other things she needed to do, I helped her with those and brought her back up to speed. And I thought at the time that I was leaving that she was going to be ready to take over my caseload and there was going to be no lapse in treatment for the inmates, which is really the most important thing here. From this experience, I think I really learned that taking the initiative to be assertive and address a conflict with a coworker is a really great first step, especially before involving a supervisor or anyone else in the situation. And I also think I gained a lot more confidence when having to deal with conflict with a coworker in similar situations.
Great, thank you.
All right, so that was a great sample in that we were able to see that progression from the S to the T to the A to the R in the STAR story. And one of the things I really love about this example is that the individual was able to highlight both hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills being the technical component of the job itself. So she was able to speak to her training capabilities as well as her attentiveness to inmates, which in that case was the client base for this particular interview scenario. And in that way illustrate her fit for the job itself that she was interviewing for. She also was able to weave in a ton of information about her soft skills, from interpersonal communication with a new colleague to how to handle conflict and resolve a situation without escalating it to a supervisor, to even her thinking process in problem solving and sorting out how she would go about approaching the colleague whom she'd had some conflict with, how she might phrase that conversation and then navigate the relationship so that they could have a productive working relationship and reach a positive outcome for the organization and the clients, which was the end goal. So this was a really rich response where the interviewer was able to weave in a lot of detail that was specific to the job as well as specific to her strengths all in one. Another reason I love this example is that we see the L thrown in, the learning at the end. That really can be added as a cap off to any kind of story response that you would give within an interview, in that showcasing what you learned and took away to grow professionally from any given scenario is always a very positive way to portray yourself to an employer. Employers are always interested in seeing individuals that are growth oriented and looking at not only how can they fulfill the job at hand, but how can they continue to grow and contribute to the organization in a meaningful way, maybe reach levels of promotion and grow their skill set so that they are continually elevating the organization as they're elevating within their career path. So that L at the end is great, and just a nice tag on the STAR stories. The STAR framework is the most important base, but if you can tack on that L, it's a great bonus. So as we look at some additional ways to prepare responses, some other common questions and answers are noted within a document called Top 50 Interview Questions. It is accessible on our website. We'll also have a link to it within the slides for this presentation towards the end. We did want to call out that item of tell me about a time you handle conflict, because typically that is very common as an interview question within all sorts of jobs and all sorts of levels of jobs, as interpersonal communication and relationships are a vital part of every organization's working success. Another resource that we have for you to prepare is a system called Standout, where you can do a recorded mock interview and basically set up an interview for yourself, and then be able to go through it in a screen-to-screen setting, and then be able to review your responses and see how your nonverbal and verbal communication line up, and where you might have opportunities to further practice and enhance your interview preparation before the day of a live interview. And then last but not least, and probably one of the greatest tactics that we have for interview preparation, is to do a mock interview with our staff. We have here myself and Estella on our webinar, whom you've met. We do mock interviews with students and alumni all the time, and it really is a great way to prepare and have more of those in-moment reactions and feelings that can help you to be very polished and confident on the day of your actual interview. So we invite you to reach out to us for a mock interview at any time. All right, another important part of interview preparation is planning what to wear. And of course, you always want to look polished and give a great first impression. So a few of the standard rules to live by for interview attire include: go neutral. Conservative colors in business attire is always a safe bet, no matter what kind of job you're applying for. If you're ever worried about being overdressed for an organization, take confidence in the fact that it's always better to overdress than underdress within an interview scenario. So having a good go-to suit to access for interviews is a great way to go about it. That's something you can plan well ahead of time, even before you have interviews scheduled. But neutral also includes colors. Black, navy, and gray are good fallbacks in regard to standard colors for interview attire. Make sure your clothes are wrinkle-free. Plug in that iron and get some practice using it with your interview clothing. So you'll want to be sure you're dressed to impress, making sure that every piece, from the suit itself to the accessories to your shoes to even your jewelry, are polished and looking their best before you walk in the room. If you have any visible body piercings, tattoos, or other types of body art, those are good things to cover up during an interview. If you're applying to a tattoo parlor, then you can let all your tattoos show. But otherwise, it's generally best to cover them up, and that can easily be done with long sleeves, suit pants or skirt, etc. If you have fingernails or other types of hair styling that you like to do, you can plan to potentially tone that down for the interview. Just make sure everything is clean and neat, and then be prepared with some final touches, such as making sure that your pockets are empty, so you don't have big bulky things clinking in your pockets. Minimize your fragrances. Make sure that you're just using a bit of perfume or cologne rather than a heavy dose for an interview. And then double check yourself for the overall look of how everything goes together. Here is just a few more tips that we had mentioned there. We want to, of course, make sure that ultimately you're matching the look of the organization. So if you have any doubts about what to wear for an interview, a drive-by is always a great tactic. If you live within vicinity of the organization, you can actually give them a visit and see what kind of attire folks are wearing as they're walking in for their job. This is something that can often be done outside without even having to walk in, but if needed, you can even walk in the lobby, just kind of take a spin around in the open spaces and see how folks are attired in their day-to-day jobs. Again, erring on the side of caution with a suit is always great. It's often difficult to be too formal for an interview. And so even if you see folks dressed in business casual on the job, we still would recommend wearing a suit for the interview itself. For women specifically, we'll hop into some tips for men on the next slide. But for women, here are some great go-to strategies. Of course, wearing a suit with a jacket, whether that's a pantsuit or a skirt suit, whatever your preference may be. If you do wear a skirt suit, conservative hosiery that is neutral in skin tone is often a great way to go. One pair of earrings is advisable. So if you do have multiple piercings, this would be the time to just go ahead and choose one beautiful pair of conservative jewelry, office appropriate, etc., to wear for the interview. Conservative also tends to be the way to go for nail color and makeup. So if you have very colorful seasonal or other kinds of personal expression that you like to do with your makeup and your nails, toning it down for an interview can be good. And then of course you can often show more personality and bring those things back once you're on the job and have successfully secured the position. If you do have long hair, it's a great strategy oftentimes to pull it back just so it's not in your face and you're not physically touching or doing things with your hair during the interview, as that can just be a little bit distracting at times. If you do choose to wear your hair down, that's okay. You just might want to be mindful of refraining from touching it and moving it during the interview so that the employer's attention is always focused on you and more so on your verbal responses versus your physical actions. So these are some tips, and if you have questions, we're also always happy to take a look at interview attire or give suggestions on places to purchase or secure free interview attire and put together that whole polished look with accessories and all. For men, the advice falls along the same line. Of course, you'll want to be clean shaven and well groomed, not only your hair, but also any facial hair that you may have. For your suit, for men, it's often best just to go with a long sleeved shirt, tie, and suit jacket. If it's summertime and it may be hot, then there's strategies you can use to ensure that you don't get too hot in that setup before walking in, such as giving yourself time to arrive early so that you can really blast the air conditioner in your car before you make your exit and go into the building for your interview. If you are wearing a full suit, of course, dark shoes are recommended as they offer a good neutral contrast to whatever color of suit you may choose. And if you tend to wear jewelry, we do recommend taking off most rings so that, if you are married, of course, wear your wedding ring, but not to have a heavy amount of hand jewelry on for the interview. So these are some good basic rules. And then of course, if ever you have questions or need resources on where to secure great interview attire, we've got a ton of suggestions ready for you. All right, so after you have researched the company, prepared your stories, planned what to wear, now it's time to plan what to bring. You'll want to bring extra copies of your resume. It's logical to assume that the person interviewing you probably has a copy of your resume, but you never know. You could be interviewing with a whole panel of folks, or the interviewer may just forget to print off a copy of your resume. I've seen both of those things happen, both for myself and my individual interview experience, as well as with job seekers that I've coached in their interview preparation. They thought, I've had a situation, I've known others where it was assumed that the interview was with a single person, and then you walk in the room, there's 7. So having extra copies of your resume can make sure that everybody is able to view that outstanding resume of all of your skills and accomplishments as they're relevant to the job, and they're able to look at it in hand while you're sharing your interview responses. A professional folder and pen is also an excellent tool set to have for an interview. As we noted, you'll be prepared with some research, and there might be some pieces of your research that you would bring with you into the interview, and having them neatly contained within a folder gives you the opportunity to access that information quickly when you need it, and then also keep it tidy and just look nice and polished and professional overall. You'll of course want to bring a pen because you might have other questions that come up during the interview, or things that you want to jot down that might kind of guide your star stories to be more specific to the job or the organization when you get to that point as you're kind of evolving through the questions and answers in the course of that conversation. You'll also want to bring your reference list. Some jobs do require a list of references with the application, others don't. It's always a great idea to have a list of references prepared. A good strong ending to an interview is to offer references, particularly if there's an indication that you may be asked to a second round or next round of an interview. So they're not necessarily something you would have to give out, but it's good to have on hand. Any information that you use to complete the application, if there were supplemental documents or samples of your work, transcripts, anything of that nature, it's good to have that with you as well so that you have your evidence of application on hand if any piece of that comes up in the conversation, or if it may be helpful to offer to multiple folks within an interview setting, again, assuming that there could be a panel interview. With all of those items, they can be easy to gather within a portfolio. So if you have work samples, then definitely a portfolio is recommended. If you don't have work samples required, you can be thinking about whether there are any work samples that could be relevant, and that gives you a point of choice as to whether you might want to go ahead and create a portfolio to bring with you. We'll be talking about portfolios in the spring semester of this current academic year. And so if that's a topic that interests you, we definitely invite you to keep an eye out for that session and attend. And if you have interviews that you're preparing for prior to that live session, we welcome you to reach out to us anytime. We've got a ton of information and resources to help you build polished and excellent portfolios for your interviews. Okay, so another important piece of your interview performance is, of course, your nonverbal communication. So how you stand, how you have your posture when you're sitting in the interview seat, the way you make eye communication, even the way that you gesture with your hands, all have an impact in how the employer views you as a candidate. So you want to make sure that your nonverbal communication is confident and well poised. Again, interview practice is going to be a great way to hone your nonverbal communication, as it will give you a chance to practice using gestures, different ways to fold your hands, etc., so that when you're in the interview, it's not something you're having to think about, but something that comes a little bit more naturally and you can give a bit of attention to while you're focusing on how you navigate that interview conversation. Some other pieces of nonverbal communication that may not come immediately to mind include the accessories that you'll have with you. So most everybody carries a phone with them now. It's very important to have your phone turned off or a minimum silenced during an interview. The worst interruption you might want would be to have your phone ring in the middle of giving a response or in the middle of hearing a question from the employer. So that's something to double, triple check before going into the interview, is that your phone is turned off or silenced. You'll also want to make sure that your waiting room behavior matches how you want the employer to view you within the interview itself. How you interact with the receptionist, the front desk folks, or anybody else that may be walking through or waiting with you in the lobby area or outer area prior to going into the interview is very important. I've actually known many employers who utilize waiting room behavior as part of their screening, and they ask for the receptionist to maybe say something or ask a question, see how the interviewee responds, and then report back on what their interaction was like. They may also have security cameras and things like that within the building, which is pretty common in most offices and businesses today. And so they might see how you walk into the building and how you are behaving when you're sitting there. And so you just want to be conscientious of that. Logically, of course, you'll have great behavior going on in there, but something to keep in mind is that it may also be part of your evaluation. So good to be attentive to. Whether it's in the waiting room or in the interview itself, of course, another good element of your nonverbal communication is how you shake hands and make eye contact. So a good firm handshake that's not a death grip, not squeezing too tight, but a firm one that shows confidence is important. And then, of course, making good eye contact throughout. In this era of COVID-19, we may not be shaking hands, so you can be looking at what kind of interaction folks have. If a hand is offered, then it would be appropriate to shake it, and then, of course, wash your hands later. And if a hand is not offered, then that would be appropriate in this season to refrain from extending the handshake. So you can navigate that. And if you have questions that are more climate specific, given the climate that we're in now, we can talk about that as well as part of your interview preparation with your career counselor prior to your job interviews. Sitting up straight is a very important, a good tactic for that, which we would demonstrate if we were doing this webinar in person, is sitting slightly to the edge of your seat rather than sitting back and leaning into the back of the seat. When you sit back, it tends to kind of naturally force you into a little bit of a slump on your shoulders, which then kind of collapses your diaphragm and mute your volume as a speaker while you are sharing your responses to the interview. Sitting up straight gives good confidence in view of your shoulders and also helps you to elevate your head and open your diaphragm so that your words are nicely spoken with optimum tone and clarity. And so that's a great way to go about it. If you're sitting in a seat that has a back, just scoot up, an inch or two. You don't have to be sitting at the edge of the seat, but just scooting up a little bit so that your back is not touching the back of the chair will give you a natural looking, very tall, straight posture. Crossing arms and legs, we generally recommend crossing them at the ankle, only because in nervousness, sometimes it's easy to fidget, and when your legs are crossed, there tends to be more movement and fidgeting than when not. So that's not an absolute rule, but it is something that I often suggest to job seekers is just go ahead and cross your legs at the ankle as you're sitting slightly forward on your seat. It's a very professional posture, and then it's easier to control your movements and nonverbal communication from that stance as you're navigating that conversation. A few of the tidbits is just to relax after going through all that practice and being very careful about how you're going to be going through the interview. You might feel tense, but relax. All your preparation will give you that confidence in the moment and allow you to really enjoy the conversation and let your personality also shine as you're showing what a great candidate you are for the job. Of course, be honest and authentic. Anything that you say you can do in the interview, you're ultimately going to have to do on the job. So it's best to be honest and authentic in how you share your capabilities. As an entry-level job seeker, if you are going straight from college into career, then most employers will be anticipating that there will be training involved. So if there are elements of the skill set that is noted in the interview that you don't yet possess, it's always perfectly appropriate to say, I'm not a master of that skill set yet, but I love training. I love to develop my skill set further. And I look forward to learning more about that and diving into that training so I can be really effective in that way if I were given the great opportunity to take this job. And in that way, you're showing your eagerness to learn, even if there may be some form of skill gap between your current skill set and that required for the job. That's a piece of being honest and authentic. And of course, listen carefully. The answers that you prepared may need to shift a little bit in the course of the conversation as you learn more about the organization and how they view the skills that they're requesting for that job. Thinking before speaking is a great tactic as it can give you a moment to center and calm yourself and find the appropriate answer at any moment. So if ever you're given a question and you're not quite sure what your immediate response will be, it's okay to pause. You can actually have a 30-second pause that is quite natural, and it may feel like an eternity to you, but it will feel quite natural in the course of a conversation where you can just take a moment and think. And even stating out loud if you wanted to, let me think about that just a moment, shows that you're being very intentional about how you're responding to the questions and that you really care about finding the best possible response that will illustrate your skill set for the employer. Another tactic to stall, if needed, is to ask the employer to repeat the question. And so if you want to just give yourself another moment to think, you could even ask the employer, could you please share that question again? I want to make sure that I caught it all correctly. And then as they're restating it, you can be filtering through your possible responses and giving yourself that moment to gather yourself together before you launch into your response. Addressing all aspects of the question is also important. And so if you're ever uncertain, if you have spoken to every element of a question, when you feel like you've wrapped up, it's perfectly okay to say, did that answer everything that you were looking for? Did I leave anything out? And then that gives the employer the opportunity to share whether or not they'd like more information or clarification on any element of your response. All right, so the close and the follow-up is the final step. This is a very important step as it leads you into the next progression of the interview process. Most jobs do have multiple interviews. Typically 2 or more is the common. I've interviewed for jobs and known others who have interviewed for jobs that had 5 interview rounds before all was said and done. And so if there are multiple layers, your close and follow-up will be very instrumental in ushering those transitions to the positive end goal, which is, of course, the job offer. So, circling back to where we started, the first tip for your close is to have questions ready to ask. And all that research that you did in your initial preparation for the interview really pays off here because it allows you to ask very intelligent, thoughtful questions. Having looked through all the information on the employer's website, you won't need to worry about asking questions that could be easily answered from the website. And that way too, you're ensuring that the employer recognizes that you've done your research and that you are looking for more information beyond what was stated on their website and the questions that you have. It's also very important to avoid any discussion of salary or benefits. You do want to reserve any money matters until after the job offer is presented to you. We'll have a webinar coming up in a few weeks on salary negotiation. And in that one, we'll dive into all the details about how to navigate those money matters, how to answer questions about salary and benefit, and how to find out more information yourself about the details that will be critical for you to make a good decision on whether or not you could accept a job offer. But the most important thing is during the interview process, do not open up the discussion to salary and benefits. You first want to make sure that you are a great match for the job. And then after the job offer is made, be prepared to dive into all the financials. We have a lot of great suggestions on how to navigate kind of the sticky points. If you are asked about salary during the interview, there's many ways to go about responding to it that help you to defer to the negotiating timeframe post-offer, while also remaining quite strong in your standing as a candidate during the interview process itself. So we encourage you to get in touch with our career counseling staff here in our career center so we can talk through those sorts of questions as well. So some sample follow-up questions are noted here. If you are not quite sure what to ask, these are good standbys that really could apply to any job, any organization. So asking the employer themselves what, in their opinion, makes the organization a great place to work can give you some outstanding insight into what they view within the organization. They've had time working within that company and may have another important perspective of what it's like to work there and what makes an impression on them as a great place to work. And they'll be eager to see your eagerness in knowing all those positive elements about the organization beyond the job that you're interviewing for. Another great question is asking about the challenges that a person could face in that position. That shows the employer that you are keenly aware that there could be some challenges to the job and that you would be interested in their insight and how to best navigate that. It also actually helps you prepare for the next round of interview. If you've noted the challenges they're having, you can then, through your ongoing research and preparation, start thinking through your STAR stories, doing more research, and forming responses to potential questions that would address those challenges. The other questions noted here can give you more insight into the organization's culture, the dynamic of teams and how different departments work together, as well as the organization's approach to communication and problem solving. And so in that way, you're gaining a lot of valuable insight that will help you determine if you're a great match for the organization as much as a match for the job. And since interviewing is much like matchmaking in love, You do want to make sure that you're finding an excellent match because you invest an awful lot of time and energy at your job. And so doing all this work and asking thoughtful questions in the process will ensure your satisfaction and quality of life post-job offer. Should you receive it and should you accept? Another important piece of the follow-up is the thank yous. So of course you want to thank the employer during the interview itself as you're wrapping it up. Express to them your interest, let them know I'm very interested and even more interested after having this wonderful conversation with you. Re-emphasize your strengths that show you're a great fit for the job, and then share any added value you can bring. So if there's something, a theme or a piece of the qualification that stood out consistently throughout the interview, you'll want to include that in your closing comments and your thank you, so that that is making a big impression in the employer's takeaways and how they're thinking about you after the interview. It's always a good idea to ask for business cards for each person that you interviewed with. So if you interviewed with 1 or 7 people, get a business card from each of them so that you have their contact information, with the goal being that you write an email to each person within 24 hours and then send a nice, tidy, short little thank you note by mail as follow-up, which they'll receive 2 to 3 business days after that email. The handwritten thank you note is a very professional and polished touch in that it really helps you to stand out from other candidates. It's pretty rare for folks to send handwritten notes these days, so it's often a pleasant surprise to get a thank you card in the mail. And then you're reinforcing your name recognition. So that employer will have the opportunity to recall their great interaction with you from your interview, the email that you sent, and now they're looking at this beautiful thank you card in their hands. And it just gives many layers to their positive impressions of you as a candidate. I have seen the thank you note sway an employer's decision toward one candidate over another in the ultimate hiring decision. So in scenarios where there have been employers that had 2 candidates that were really neck and neck and very equally qualified for a job, I have multiple times seen an employer go with the individual that sent the thank you note because it was such a thoughtful and unique added touch that it helped them to stand out, and it broke that neck and neck tie with the competition for the role. So it's always a great strategy. We again have resources and tips on thank you notes. So get in touch with us if you have more questions on that. All right, here are some resources that were referenced earlier on in our webinar. This is accessible to you through the links provided. And then as students and alumni at Fresno Pacific University, of course, you can also secure a copy of the slides for this webinar and then be able to click right over to those resources. And here is our Career Center staff. So wrapping up our discussion on interview preparation, again, I just want to emphasize our availability to you. If you have questions or concerns about any phase of your interview preparation and research, please do get in touch. That's what we're here for. We love interview preparation as it's one of our big areas that we get to interact with students and alumni most. So we're ready and willing at any time to share resources, do a mock interview, or talk through any questions or concerns that might be helpful to sort out before you walk into those wonderful job interviews. And for more information and resources about interview preparation and beyond, please check out our website as well as our Career Center Instagram, where you'll receive lots of ongoing information, tips, and even connections to employers and jobs in our community through the Instagram. So we thank you for joining us today and look forward to chatting with you soon about your interview preparation.